Hi, Paranormal Pals. Welcome to the Secret Society of the Spooky Sisterhood podcast and our very special Halloween episode. As you probably remember from the last few episodes, we asked for folks to send in their spookiest stories and their experiences that you could share with us, and y'all delivered. So this week, we are going to read, or in some cases, listen to these stories in honor of everybody's favorite holiday. So get comfortable, grab some snacks, settle in, and prepare to be spooked. All right, so our first story is from Kate, and she says, I work at a historic house museum. This story starts on the evening of November 2nd, 2024, at an event I planned with a couple of the house museum's top volunteers. We called the event Ghosts, Lore, and S'mores. What I had envisioned was a novice hunt crossed with storytelling and bonfires. There's a local paranormal team we're connected with, but they're small, so I asked them to reach out to some other investigators who might lend their time and equipment to help us raise some money for the museum. Investigators confirmed, fires lit, concessions set, the house was ready to receive visitors. People started arriving at 5:30. My desire was to have one large bonfire, but the wind had been terrible, so we settled on 4 or 5 of the portable fire pits in the gravel driveway with covers to try to mitigate potential fire risk. People ended up in clusters, which was fine, but made interaction difficult. I'm sure we sold 100 tickets. There were people everywhere. As individuals checked in, they were sorted into groups. Some went to the fires to swap stories and roast s'mores, and some went into the house with the investigators. The house is a decent size, and strategically, 3 groups can be in it at a time. I invited a local medium I know just to be on site, tell stories if she wanted, or join the groups. Mostly just to keep a pulse on the house because I trust her and care about our family of spirits. Maybe an hour and a half after the event started, I found her and asked how it was going. She said that she thought the event was going well, but that Anne, one of the spirits, was acting off, refusing to go in the room she was normally in, almost like she was afraid. The medium's husband was with her. He pulled out his phone and showed me a video he took in the front room where Anne would not go. In the video, a large, dark shadow crosses the lens. This was something he didn't see until he reviewed the video after he'd left the room. I'd never witnessed a shadow in the house before, and I was concerned for Anne, but at a loss for what could be done at that time. Around 10, I went into the basement. The late hour had sent several people home, and my 12-year-old was dying to experience an actual investigation. He had been with me all night. The investigator was instructing guests on how to use equipment, and they seemed to be getting solid responses. Some of the responses clearly meant for the medium who was in the basement with us, as it was her name coming across on the devices. She could see a man in a dark corner of the basement and mentioned that she felt it was the same man from upstairs. That, as you can imagine, was pretty much it for my son, so we left the basement. Shortly after we exited, the medium did too, and making it to the grass, she passed out. She was quickly attended to, and because it seemed like she didn't want an audience, I continued cleaning up. For the most part, the night was a blur. We were short volunteers and storytellers, but made do, needed to be stricter on time so everyone had an equal time investigating, but overall it felt like a success. Sunday the 3rd, there was a birthday party in our reception hall. Normally I would be on site for rentals, but I had plans. According to my calendar, it was a movie. So my number 1 volunteer was covering for me. As an add-on for rentals, we offer half-price house tours, and this is how that volunteer ended up leading a group of almost 30 people through the museum. Pulling my phone out to check my text messages, I saw the volunteer had messaged, "Who is Fergus?" Drawing a blank, I called her. "What do you mean, who is Fergus? We don't have a Fergus." She said a young girl, maybe 10 years old on the tour, asked, "Who's Fergus? Why does he have a rope around his neck?" The volunteer said, "I don't know," and texted me hoping I would have an answer, but of course I was unavailable. Now on the phone with her, my brain was working and I was rolling the name Fergus over in my mind and then out loud, "Fergus? You mean Ferguson?" She said, "Maybe." The man who built the house I work in was an attorney. The most notorious person he ever represented was a man named Champ Ferguson. The only mention of Ferguson is on the Civil War Trails sign in the driveway. The only reason I knew about him was because a man had taken a tour the summer before and read the sign on his way out. When he got home, he felt compelled to call to tell me that he had one of the trial articles framed in his lake house, and he wanted to make a copy for me the next time he was there, and that I should expect it in the future. I know this seems like an odd occurrence, but things like this happen to me all the time. I thanked the man and filed this conversation away, but a couple months later, true to his word, he showed up with a poster tube containing a copy of the article. We looked at it together, had a nice but unremarkable conversation. I thanked him for bringing it, and after he left, I rolled it up and put it under the bed in my office. The main reason I didn't know about Champ Ferguson is because he wasn't part of the house's story. To me, it's strange that he's mentioned on the sign since the original owner was gone from here before that case went to trial. I filled the volunteer in on what I knew, asked her how the rest of the party went, and thanked her for covering for me. It was the 5th before I returned to the house museum after ghosts, lore, and s'mores, and I was ready to work. The air was crisp out. I set my stuff down in my office and headed to the kitchen to make a pot of coffee. Maybe you're familiar with that feeling you get in the pit of your stomach when something is out of sorts in a space. I'd been bouncy and full of energy, ready to seize the day, but when I got to the threshold of the parlor, I felt it. Cautiously, I opened the door, unsure of what I would find on the other side. Everything was in place except one chair that was pushed out like someone had just gotten up. I may be the only employee at this house museum, but several people have keys, so I tucked the chair in and sent text messages to the board asking if anyone had been at the house, and the volunteer asking if she remembered that the chair was left out for any reason. No one had been there, and the chairs were tucked in like always. I tried to shake off my nerves, poured a cup of coffee, and went back to my office to work. Sent emails, made a social media post, finished my coffee. At the door to the parlor, my hand hesitated on the knob. The feeling returned to my stomach, and I chastised myself for being afraid. When I opened the door, the chair was pushed back out. In the early days working here, I was anxious almost all the time, and that was uncomfortable, but rarely was I afraid. On November 5th, I was so afraid that it was in my muscles and the soles of my feet. Fear sat on my shoulders. Even the memory brings the feelings back, and it almost hurts to type. I'm certain that Champ Ferguson was in the house and that he wanted all of us to be afraid. I couldn't work inside anymore that day, so I found things to do in the yard, hoping that he wouldn't be there the next day. Morning meetings away from the house kept me busy most of the day. I only stepped into the house long enough to sense that Ferguson remained. I showed the reception hall at 2 and left for the day. Thankfully, there were no more tours. On the 7th, I had a meeting at another historic house. The woman who runs that house mentioned that it had been unusually active, and I mentioned that I had experienced some unusual activity too. Fearing the worst, when I pulled up to the museum, I got out of my car, climbed the stairs to the porch. Even outside, I could feel a difference. The oppressiveness had lifted, and the house was at peace again. A week ago, a woman called this house that had 6 generations of the same family a beacon. The house calls to them. I've always felt that. Today, the living descendants call coming here, going back home, even the ones who never lived here. And though the lawyer didn't live here when he represented Ferguson, I think Ferguson was able to follow the beacon through his connection to the lawyer. Why 5 days in November? I have lots of theories, but your guess is as good as mine. Well, first of all, Kate, you're an excellent storyteller. And now I'm dying to know why Ferguson and why did it happen then? What was it that brought this about? Thank you so much for sharing this story with us. And definitely, if you find out anything else, please let us know. We would love a follow-up. Our second story comes from Brian. This one is kind of short, but Brian says, this is one of many other paranormal experiences I've had and has offered to send us more stories. So we will anxiously await those. Brian says, So, in 2006, in our Northwest Florida home, my son and I are sitting on the floor rolling a ball. He's 2 years old. I'm sitting on the floor with my back facing the front door. All of a sudden, my son starts to freak out. He's in a full-blown panic and says, "Lights, Daddy, look, bright lights." He was pointing directly behind me and scared to death. He jumped into my lap, shaking, and Cowie, our dog, was sitting next to us and growling at something behind me. She was in full-blown protection mode, growling and staring. The hair on the back of my neck was standing straight up, cold shiver up my spine. Fully expecting to see something scary or a UFO or a ghost or the librarian from Ghostbusters, I slowly turned around. I saw nothing at all, which freaked me out even more. I called out loud, "Whoever is here, show yourself or leave." Suddenly, out of the corner of my eye, a shadow darted down the hall. I got up and followed it, and it disappeared into the hall. For the next few years in the house, the paranormal events continued and ranged from more shadow figures, keys and such going missing, and sleep paralysis. As soon as I could, I moved, and most of the ghost stuff stopped. As it turned out, the former homeowner did die in the house. Brian, what? How did this just all of a sudden happen to you? The shadow figures and sleep paralysis, which is terrifying. And you said most of the ghost stuff stopped. So what have you experienced since then? You did say that you had other stories, so we're looking forward to hearing your follow-up on this one. Thank you for sending that story in, Brian. Hi, pals. For this episode, the code word is ghoul. Next up is from Amber, and let me tell you, Amber is a storyteller. She says, "There was a point in my life that I was very vocal about things I have experienced. I didn't fear people thinking I was crazy, and I was adamant about changing a skeptic's mind. In reality, I didn't understand how or why a person could be a skeptic. My first memories as a child involved an imaginary friend. It was my form of normal. Now looking back, I know the things I experienced were not normal. That I had that so-called sixth sense and was extremely sensitive to things other people were not. I've experienced things that others only experience when watching fictional horror movies. I lived in a horror movie." Her first story is titled Man in the Chair. As I mentioned, at a very early age, I would see different entities around my house. My parents blamed it on an active imagination, but it was real. At that time, we lived in a very old house with an additional guest house attached. We just used the guest house as storage and we never had occupants. My father was an auctioneer and was constantly bringing home old antiques. One day, my father brought home a green recliner to go in my room for my mother to read to me at night. However, an older gentleman with a black beard and hat occupied the chair every night after my mother would leave. He would just sit there, appearing more as a silhouette or shadow. He never spoke and he never moved. He just sat there and watched me. I strongly believe fear is not something someone is born with, but instead comes from experience. This figure terrified me because even as a child, I knew he wasn't supposed to be there, and I couldn't understand why my parents couldn't see him. She also wrote about Shadow Man. I wish he was the only entity in my house, but he wasn't. There was a long hallway that separated my room from the guest bedroom and the stairs. I would always see a shadow figure walking this hallway and going into the guest bedroom. It wasn't the man in the chair. This thing was much scarier. Its energy was strong and extremely negative. The feeling that I spoke about earlier originated in the hallway. Whether it was visible or not, I always knew it was around. I would run from the stairs to my room every single day. The entity then began to move around the house. I think one of the more terrifying things that happened was when I was around 10. I was getting ready in front of a mirror hanging on the bathroom door. There was a belt on the ground next to me, partially under the door. I remember vividly looking into the mirror and seeing the belt slowly slide further under the door. Thinking I was being pranked, I opened the bathroom door and no one was there. However, the belt was now on the bathroom floor. Ugh. That one gave me the chills a little bit. All right, so the last one from Amber is called Lady in White. Not only was the house leaving me in a constant state of fear and anxiety, but the guest house was a place I could physically not go into because of the dreadful feeling it gave. The few times I did go into the guest house, I would always feel like I was going to get sick and would immediately leave. The guest house was a small house with a large attic. There was a big window in the attic that overlooked the entire property. One afternoon, I was jumping on the trampoline with my friends. I believe this is the epiphany moment in my life when I realized I was not the only person to experience these things. My friend looked up at the window with a terrified look on his face. There was a woman dressed in white looking down at us. She had long blonde hair and a blank expression on her face. We watched her for a few minutes and she disappeared. The house was empty and the stairs to the attic had not been used in years. This lady didn't simply walk away from the window, she completely vanished. I had 3 friends that day that witnessed this entity disappear into thin air. This was a validation to me that I was not crazy and that there are things in this world that cannot be explained. I lived in that house until I was 12 years old. The level of activity increased through the years to the point I began documenting them in a journal with specific details of each experience. When I moved to our new house built specifically for my family, I thought things would stop and I could be a normal kid. I was wrong. So wrong. Amber, I have so many questions. First of all, stories like this always get me because clearly there's so much history probably with this old house, and you're seeing these different spirits, whether it's the man in the chair or the lady in the window. And I'm so curious how many of them came from the house and how many of them came from these like antiques and things that your father had. I would love to hear more of your stories as well, and would love some follow-ups to this if you have any more information about these spirits that you saw and who they may have been. Thank you so much for sending these. All right, we've got a couple more stories for you. Our next storyteller wanted to remain anonymous, and they're going to share their family legend. So I had some great something aunts. I'm unsure how far back they were, and I'm unsure of their names. But I do know roughly the time period, only because I was told the 2 sisters both contracted tuberculosis and were placed in Waverly Hills Sanitarium. One of the sisters succumbed to the illness while in Waverly, but the other recovered and left. I believe this occurred either in the 40s or the 50s. So, the actual story and legend occurs after the surviving aunt left the hospital. Supposedly, nobody could get a good photograph of this woman. Her face was blurred, covered by something, or just straight up missing in some of the photographs. Not just 1 or 2, but all of them. My mom swears up and down that she's seen the photographs. I haven't seen them, but I'm still waiting to. These photographs on their own are strange enough, but what sealed this into family legend is the fact that they ended up being prophetic. Even though she survived tuberculosis, the disease that took her sister, she died not long after anyway, because she was killed in a car wreck. A car wreck which happened to separate her head from her body. Which, like, what? What? That's terrifying. And fascinating, like you said, that after she left the hospital, she was taking, anytime she took a photo, there was no face. I'm terrified of this story. And I also want to see the photos, so if you get a hold of them, we would love to share them with everybody. So send those my way, please. All right, you guys, last story is a recorded story from Melanie. Not this Melanie, but this Melanie and I go way back. So let's listen to this story.
Hello, Melanie. It is your friend Melanie. So I saw on Instagram that you were looking for spooky stories, so I wanted to just tell you my own personal spooky story. It's about the house that I grew up in, rural Southwest Virginia. It was an older house, I think built around the 50s. And my room was upstairs, and there was like my room and then like a back room that was full of like just storage. Okay. So anyway, I guess I'm like at this point, maybe 12, 13, and I'm, sleeping in my room. And one morning I wake up to a hand on my shoulder, right? Someone places their hand on my shoulder and I think, it's my mom waking me up. And so I turn over and there is no one there. And I promise you, I felt the hand. There was a hand firmly placed on my shoulder. Turn over, no one is there. Basically, I run down the stairs and I did not sleep in my bedroom. Really, my entire teenage years, I slept on the couch because it was terrifying. Later in life, I was talking to, my mom and dad about the house that I grew up in. They don't live there anymore. And my mom said, yeah, that house was definitely haunted by this. She said she saw this little boy several times, one time maybe like standing at the kitchen door, seen him outside, that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of glad I didn't know that at the time, that we actually lived there, because I was already terrified of that place. But yeah, so that's my spooky story. Hope that's what you're looking for. Bye.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melanie. All right, you guys. So before we sign off, I just want to give a quick reminder to visit our beacons.ai/spooky sisterhood page. From there, you'll find all of our links and links to all of the guests that we have on the podcast. I want to give a big thank you, as always, to our Patreon pals. If you haven't joined yet, as a Patreon member, you get early access to our episodes. You get access to bonus content like our After the Gavel, which there isn't one for this episode, but usually it's a really fun kind of follow-up with our guests that we do. It's a little more silly and off the cuff. And honestly, there's so much more, and there's more to come. So please go check out our Patreon. It's patreon.com/spooky sisterhood. And the only business that's left this week is to wish you all a wonderful Halloween. And for now, this meeting of the Secret Society of the Spooky Sisterhood is adjourned. Keep it spooky, Sibs.